The summer heat clung to Elizabeth Harrington's skin like a second layer as she stepped off the steamboat onto Savannah's bustling river street. July 1841 was proving to be particularly merciless, with the Georgia sun beating down upon the cobblestones until they radiated warmth through the thin soles of her traveling boots. She clutched her valise tightly, her knuckles white against the brown leather, as she scanned the dockside crowd for her aunt's driver. "Miss Harrington?" A tall man in a dark coat approached, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. "I'm Samuel, sent by Madame Willowcrest to collect you." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for the familiar name of her mother's sister, though she had never met the woman. At 19, with both parents recently deceased from typhoid, she had nowhere else to turn but to her aunt's alleged generosity. "The carriage is this way, miss," Samuel said, not offering to take her bag. His eyes never quite met hers, something Elizabeth noted with quiet unease. The carriage ride through Savannah revealed a city of elegant facades and carefully maintained appearances. Grand homes with white columns and sweeping verandas stood like sentinels of southern prosperity, while behind them Elizabeth glimpsed the smaller structures where those who maintained such grandeur were housed. "Is it much farther to Willowcrest?" she asked after nearly an hour of travel beyond the city limits. "No, miss, just beyond those cypress trees." As they rounded the bend, Willowcrest Plantation emerged from behind a curtain of Spanish moss. The main house was smaller than Elizabeth had imagined from her mother's rare descriptions, but still imposing, a two-story Greek Revival structure with columns that appeared almost skeletal in the late afternoon light. Standing on the front steps was a woman Elizabeth immediately recognized as her aunt, despite never having seen her before. Madame Catherine Willowcrest possessed the same sharp cheekbones and piercing grey eyes that had distinguished Elizabeth's mother, though Catherine's face held none of the warmth Elizabeth remembered in her mother's. "You've arrived at last," Catherine said, her voice melodic yet cold. "Welcome to Willowcrest, niece." Elizabeth curtsied as she'd been taught. "Thank you for your kindness in taking me in, Aunt Catherine." "Madame Willowcrest," her aunt corrected with a thin-lipped smile. "We observe formalities here. You'll find Willowcrest quite different from your Boston upbringing." Inside, the house was dimly lit despite the remaining daylight, heavy curtains drawn against the heat. The furnishings were expensive but dated, as if the home had been frozen in time some 15 years earlier. "You'll share a room with my other niece, your cousin Josephine," Catherine explained as they climbed the staircase. "She arrived last spring from Charleston, after similar unfortunate circumstances." "I didn't know I had a cousin," Elizabeth said, surprised. Catherine's laugh was like glass breaking. "There's much you don't know about our family, child, but you'll learn." The bedroom door opened to reveal a pale young woman, approximately Elizabeth's age, with golden hair and a face that might have been pretty, if not for the hollow look in her eyes. "Josephine, your cousin Elizabeth has arrived," Catherine announced. "Make her feel welcome. Dinner is at 7. Elizabeth, you'll find appropriate attire in the wardrobe. Your Boston dresses won't do here." After Catherine departed, the two young women regarded each other in silence until Josephine spoke softly. "How long has it been since your parents passed?" 3 months, Elizabeth replied, setting down her valise. Josephine nodded, her gaze drifting toward the window. "Mine have been gone a year. You'll get used to Willowcrest eventually. Everyone does." Something in her tone sent a chill through Elizabeth despite the room's stuffiness. "What is it like here?" she asked. Josephine finally looked directly at her, a flicker of something, warning perhaps, in her expression before it disappeared behind a carefully composed mask. "Willowcrest has its ways," she said simply, "and Madame Willowcrest ensures we all abide by them." The dining room at Willowcrest was illuminated by a dozen candles in silver holders, casting long shadows across the damask tablecloth. Elizabeth sat stiffly in her borrowed gown, a deep burgundy affair that felt too mature for her years and slightly too tight across the bodice. Josephine sat across from her, dressed in pale blue, her golden curls arranged in a style more suitable for a woman 10 years her senior. At the head of the table, Madame Willowcrest presided with regal detachment, occasionally lifting her wine-glass with fingers adorned by several heavy rings. The only other person present was Mr. Thaddeus Fleming, introduced as Madame's business associate and neighbor, owner of the adjacent Oak Ridge plantation. "Your niece has your sister's bearing, Catherine," Mr. Fleming observed, his gaze lingering uncomfortably on Elizabeth, though perhaps more unrefined potential than finished quality. "Elizabeth was raised in the North," Catherine replied, as if this explained some fundamental defect. "She hasn't had the benefit of proper Southern guidance." "Boston's loss is Savannah's gain," Fleming said, raising his glass toward Elizabeth in a toast that made her skin crawl. The dinner conversation revolved around local society, plantation affairs, and the qualities of various families in the region. Elizabeth noticed how Josephine remained nearly silent throughout, speaking only when directly addressed, her responses brief and carefully constructed. "The Harrington line has always produced women of exceptional quality," Catherine was saying. "My sister squandered her gifts in a northern marriage, but her daughter might yet redeem that mistake. I'm sure my mother never considered her marriage a mistake," Elizabeth said quietly, but firmly. "My father was a good man." A silence fell over the table. Catherine's eyes narrowed, and Josephine's face paled further, if that was possible. "Good men are rare commodities, child," Catherine finally said, her voice honey over steel, "and their goodness is generally proportional to their usefulness. Your father's usefulness ended with his death, leaving you penniless and dependent on my charity." Elizabeth swallowed her retort, remembering her precarious position. Without her aunt's support, she had nowhere to go. "You'll come to understand how the world truly operates while you're here," Catherine continued. "Willow Crest is an excellent school for young ladies who need to learn their value in society." Mr. Fleming's laughter held no humor. "Indeed, your previous students have secured quite advantageous positions." "Students?" Elizabeth asked. "I wasn't aware you ran a school, Madame Willowcrest." "Not in the formal sense," Catherine replied, "but education takes many forms. Josephine has been an apt pupil these past months, haven't you, dear?" Josephine's fingers tightened around her napkin. "Yes, madame." After dinner, the women withdrew to the parlour while Mr. Fleming enjoyed brandy in the study. Catherine instructed the girls to perform for their guest, Josephine at the pianoforte and Elizabeth to sing, despite her protests that she hadn't prepared anything. "A lady should always be ready to entertain," Catherine insisted. "Mr. Fleming is an important connection for this family." Later, as Elizabeth prepared for bed in the room she now shared with Josephine, she tried to make sense of the evening. "Does Mr. Fleming visit often?" she asked, brushing out her dark hair. Josephine, already in her nightgown, paused in turning down the bed. "Every Thursday, without fail, and sometimes when Madame sends for him specifically. He seems familiar with the household. He's one of Madame's closest associates. There are others." Josephine hesitated. "Elizabeth, did Madame explain why she invited you to Willow Crest?" "She wrote that family should support family in times of need." Josephine's laugh was brittle. "Catherine Willowcrest has never done anything out of familial duty. There's always a purpose." A knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel appeared, his expression as impassive as it had been earlier. "Madame requests Miss Elizabeth join her in her study before retiring." In the study, Catherine sat behind a large mahogany desk, writing in a leather-bound ledger. Without looking up, she said, "Close the door, Elizabeth." Elizabeth complied, then stood waiting to be acknowledged. The study walls were lined with books, but what caught her attention was a large map of Georgia, with various properties marked in red ink. "You made quite an impression on Mr. Fleming tonight," Catherine finally said, closing her ledger. "I didn't intend to make any impression at all, madame. Intention matters less than result in this world." Catherine studied her. You have natural advantages, your mother's fine features, though thankfully not her willful temperament. With proper training, you could secure a position that would benefit us all. Position? I don't understand. I had hoped to perhaps find employment as a governess eventually. Catherine's laugh was sharp. A governess? My dear, that would be a tragic waste of your potential. No, I have far more advantageous arrangements in mind. She stood and approached Elizabeth, circling her as if appraising livestock. Yes, with some refinement, you'll do very well. The season begins in September, which gives us 2 months to prepare you. Prepare me for what? Catherine's smile never reached her eyes. For your debut into society, of course. Savannah's finest families will be looking for new additions to their households. Josephine has already attracted several promising offers. Something in her tone made Elizabeth's blood run cold. What kind of offers? The kind that secure a young woman's future and bring credit to those who sponsor her, Catherine replied vaguely. Now, off to bed. Your lessons begin at dawn. Dawn at Willowcrest arrived with the harsh ringing of a handbell outside Elizabeth and Josephine's door. Elizabeth startled awake to find her cousin already dressed in a simple morning gown, her hair neatly braided. You should hurry, Josephine advised. Madame doesn't tolerate tardiness. The next 4 hours were devoted to what Catherine called corrections, an exhaustive examination of Elizabeth's posture, speech, mannerisms, and knowledge of etiquette. Each perceived deficiency was met with Catherine's cutting criticism or the sharp tap of a wooden ruler against furniture. Your Boston accent is atrocious, Catherine declared. You drop your vowels like stones, again. By midday, Elizabeth's throat was raw from repeating phrases, her back aching from walking with books balanced on her head. When they finally broke for a light luncheon, she noticed Josephine watching her with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. Does she treat you this way too? Elizabeth whispered, when Catherine stepped away to speak with the housekeeper. At first, Josephine admitted, less now that I've improved. The afternoon brought lessons of a different nature. Catherine presented what she called scenarios, hypothetical social situations that Elizabeth was expected to navigate with grace. Mr. Beaumont has hinted at his interest in acquiring your companionship, Catherine posed, but Mr. Sullivan has more extensive holdings. How do you respond to Mr. Beaumont's advances? Elizabeth frowned. I don't understand. Are these men seeking marriage? Catherine's laugh was brittle. Marriage is a quaint notion, Elizabeth. We're discussing arrangements of mutual benefit, more practical than marriage, and often more profitable for all parties. A cold realization began to dawn on Elizabeth. You're speaking of keeping a mistress. How provincial you sound. These are gentlemen's agreements, common among the finest families. A lady with proper connections can secure a position of comfort and influence without the burdens of a wife. That's... Elizabeth stopped herself from saying prostitution, aware of how Catherine might react. That's not what I was raised to expect. Your mother filled your head with romantic nonsense. This is reality. Catherine's tone hardened. You have no fortune, no prospects, and no protector. I'm offering you the chance to secure your future through the assets you do possess. That evening, Elizabeth observed Josephine with new understanding. The hollow look in her cousin's eyes, her careful movements, her practiced smiles, all took on a sinister meaning. Has she already arranged a position for you? Elizabeth asked when they were alone. Josephine stared at the brush in her hand. Mr. Hargrove has made the most generous offer. His wife is in delicate health and rarely leaves their estate. Madame says I should be grateful for such an opportunity. And are you? Grateful? I'm alive, Josephine replied, and not destitute. Madame reminds me daily that's more than many can claim. There must be alternatives, Elizabeth insisted, such as becoming a seamstress and working 16 hours a day for pennies? Or perhaps entering domestic service at the mercy of whatever man owns the house. Josephine's bitterness was palpable. Madame is right about one thing. Women like us have few paths available. We could leave, find work in another city. With what money? Under whose protection? Josephine shook her head. Madame keeps everything locked. Doors, windows, valuables. Samuel watches the grounds. The only visitors are men like Fleming, who would return us immediately. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth crept to the window. The moonlight illuminated the expansive grounds, beautiful yet threatening in their vastness. Beyond Willowcrest's boundaries lay miles of unfamiliar territory. Even if she could escape the house, where would she go? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened slightly, and a young housemaid Elizabeth hadn't seen before slipped in. "Miss Elizabeth," the girl whispered, glancing nervously at Josephine's sleeping form. "I'm Abigail. My mother worked for your mother before she married. She said I should give you this if you ever came here." She pressed a small folded paper into Elizabeth's palm. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked. "Names and directions, people who might help, but you didn't get it from me." Abigail slipped back out as quietly as she had entered. Elizabeth unfolded the paper. Written in faded ink were several names and cryptic directions, meaningless to her now but potentially valuable. She quickly hid the paper in the lining of her boot, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. A week passed at Willowcrest, each day bringing more of Catherine's intensive refinement lessons. Elizabeth learned to move silently, to modulate her voice to a pleasing timbre, to redirect conversations without seeming to do so. More disturbing were the lessons in what Catherine called selective compliance, the art of seeming to yield while maintaining inner resistance. "Men desire the illusion of conquest," Catherine instructed. "Give them that satisfaction without surrendering your advantage." Throughout it all, Elizabeth observed and listened, gathering information while presenting the appearance of grudging acceptance. She noted which servants might be sympathetic, memorized the household schedules, and studied the geography of the plantation through glimpses from various windows. Her opportunity came unexpectedly one afternoon, when Catherine was called away to deal with a dispute among the field workers. Left alone in the study, Elizabeth had perhaps 15 minutes before her aunt's return. She went directly to the desk where Catherine kept her ledger. The leather-bound book was locked, but Elizabeth had noticed Catherine keeping a key in a small lacquered box. Inside the box, she found not only the key, but several letters addressed to Catherine from prominent local families, the Hargroves, Sullivans, and Beaumonts Catherine had mentioned in her scenarios. With trembling fingers, Elizabeth unlocked the ledger. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. Pages of entries, spanning nearly 2 decades, detailed arrangements between Catherine and various plantation owners and businessmen. Young women, most identified only by first names or initials, were listed alongside monetary figures and the names of men who had acquired them. Some entries included cryptic notes: returned after 6 months, unsuitable temperament, or relocated to New Orleans establishment after patron's marriage. The most recent pages showed Josephine's name with several notations and a final entry. Arrangement with H finalized. Delivery scheduled September 12th. Elizabeth's own name appeared on the next line, still without details, but clearly awaiting similar arrangements. She had just relocked the ledger when Catherine returned, flushed with anger from whatever confrontation had occurred outside. "Lazy and ungrateful, the lot of them," she muttered before noticing Elizabeth. "Why are you just standing there? Return to your French exercises." That night, Elizabeth shared her discovery with Josephine, showing her the hidden note from Abigail. "This could be our way out," she whispered. Josephine stared at the paper, unconvinced. "Even if we could leave, where would we go? These names, we don't know these people. They knew my mother. That's enough to start with." "You don't understand what Madame is capable of," Josephine warned. "She has connections everywhere. Girls who've tried to leave before were brought back and sent to much worse situations than what she had originally planned for them. Worse than being sold to married men as mistresses." Josephine's silence was answer enough. September 12th is when she plans to send you to Hargrove, Elizabeth persisted. That's just over a month away. We need to act before then. And you? Your name is in her book too. All the more reason to leave. Elizabeth took Josephine's hands. We're family, the only real family either of us has left. I won't leave you here. Josephine withdrew her hands. I need time to think. This isn't simple defiance of Madame. It's risking everything. Elizabeth nodded, understanding her cousin's fear. Think, then. But not too long. Thursday arrived with an air of heightened tension at Willowcrest. The household staff moved with greater urgency, preparing for Mr. Fleming's regular visit. Elizabeth observed Catherine inspecting every detail, from the polish on the silver to the arrangement of fresh flowers in the parlour. Mr. Fleming appreciates precision, Catherine told Elizabeth as she critically examined her niece's appearance. Your hair should be up tonight, showing your neck. The green silk, I think. It complements your complexion. Is Mr. Fleming to be one of my potential arrangements? Elizabeth asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. Catherine's smile was calculating. Fleming has particular tastes. He prefers to sample the merchandise before recommending it to his associates. Elizabeth felt ill, but maintained her composure. I see. I doubt that you do, but you will. Fleming has been instrumental in placing several of my previous girls with the finest families in Georgia. His approval can secure you a position that would otherwise be beyond your reach. The green silk dress Catherine had selected was cut lower than anything Elizabeth had worn before. As she stood before the mirror while Josephine helped with the final adjustments, she hardly recognized herself. You look beautiful, Josephine said softly. That will make it easier and harder. Meaning? Men like Fleming expect beauty, but beauty also raises their expectations of performance. Elizabeth met her cousin's eyes in the mirror. Have you? Yes, Josephine answered the unfinished question. It's part of Madame's process. She calls it preliminary assessment. When Mr. Fleming arrived, he brought with him another man, introduced as Mr. Sullivan, one of the names from Catherine's ledger. I mentioned your new acquisition, Fleming explained to Catherine. James was intrigued enough to join us. How delightful, Catherine replied, though Elizabeth detected annoyance beneath her smile. I hadn't planned on presenting Elizabeth quite yet, but perhaps a preliminary introduction would be appropriate. Dinner was an excruciating affair, with both men evaluating Elizabeth as one might appraise a horse or hunting dog. Their questions about her education, her musical abilities, her knowledge of literature seemed innocent enough, but their eyes conveyed the true nature of their assessment. Your niece shows promise, Catherine, Sullivan commented, though she lacks Josephine's natural compliance. There's a certain resistance in her bearing. Nothing that can't be corrected, Catherine assured him. Elizabeth has only been with us a short time. The northern influence requires additional attention to overcome. After dinner, Catherine instructed Elizabeth to play the pianoforte while Josephine sang. As they performed, Elizabeth noticed Fleming and Sullivan conferring in low voices, occasionally glancing in their direction. Later, Catherine directed Josephine to entertain Mr. Sullivan in the garden parlour, while she escorted Elizabeth and Fleming to the study. Mr. Fleming has expressed interest in providing your first lessons in social grace, Catherine informed Elizabeth. I'll leave you to become better acquainted. Before Catherine could depart, however, a commotion erupted from the direction of the kitchen. Samuel appeared at the study door, his usual composure disturbed. Madame, there's a fire in the north field. The wind is pushing it toward the cotton storage. Catherine's face paled. Excuse me, gentlemen. This requires my attention. Elizabeth, entertain Mr. Fleming until I return. As soon as Catherine left, Fleming moved closer to Elizabeth, his intentions clear in his expression. Your aunt has spoken highly of your potential, he said, reaching out to touch her hair. Though she warned you might need a firmer hand than your cousin, Elizabeth stepped back. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, sir. Fleming laughed. "There's no misunderstanding, Miss Harrington. Your aunt and I have a long-standing arrangement. She provides suitable companions for gentlemen of means, and I facilitate the introductions. You should consider yourself fortunate. Many young women in your position would end up in far less comfortable circumstances. And what position is that exactly? Orphaned, penniless, dependent." He advanced again. "Catherine has been preparing you for the reality of your situation. Now it's time for your practical education to begin." As he reached for her, Elizabeth made a split-second decision. She grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from Catherine's desk and swung it with all her strength. The paperweight connected with Fleming's temple with a sickening thud. He staggered backward, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to stunned disbelief, before he collapsed onto Catherine's Persian rug. Blood began spreading beneath his head, staining the intricate patterns crimson. Elizabeth stood frozen, the paperweight still clutched in her trembling hand. The reality of what she'd done crashed over her in waves. She had struck a man, possibly killed him, in her aunt's study. There would be no explaining this away, no possibility of mercy from Catherine or the authorities. The distant shouting from the field fire snapped her back to the present moment. She had minutes at most before someone returned. Moving with desperate purpose, Elizabeth knelt beside Fleming and checked for signs of life. His chest still rose and fell, though weakly, and blood continued to pulse from the wound on his head. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though not entirely sure she meant it. Leaving him where he lay, she turned her attention to Catherine's desk. The ledger was her first target. With the key still in the drawer where she'd found it before, Elizabeth quickly unlocked the book and tore out the pages with her and Josephine's names. As an afterthought, she grabbed several more pages documenting Catherine's most recent arrangements. Next, she searched for anything of value. In a small lockbox, she found several banknotes and gold coins, enough perhaps to get them far from Savannah if they were careful. She hesitated only briefly before taking everything. As she moved toward the door, Fleming groaned and stirred slightly. Elizabeth froze, terrified he would regain consciousness, but he only shifted before falling still again. She couldn't stay to determine if he would live or die. Her own survival depended on immediate action. In the corridor, she could hear voices from the direction of the parlor where Josephine had been left with Sullivan. Elizabeth slipped in the opposite direction, taking the servants' stairs to the second floor. Josephine wasn't in their bedroom. Elizabeth changed quickly out of the green silk dress, donning the simplest traveling outfit she could assemble from the wardrobe. She stuffed the bank notes and torn ledger pages into a small reticule, along with the paper Abigail had given her. Where was Josephine? Elizabeth couldn't leave without her cousin, but searching the house would increase her chances of discovery. As if in answer to her unspoken question, the bedroom door opened, and Josephine slipped inside, her face flushed and her eyes wild. "Elizabeth! Sullivan tried to—" She stopped, taking in Elizabeth's changed appearance. "What's happened?" "Fleming attacked me. I struck him with a paperweight." Elizabeth's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "He's unconscious in the study, possibly dying. We have to leave, now." Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. "You struck Fleming. Elizabeth, they'll hang you." "Not if they don't find me. Us." Elizabeth grabbed her cousin's hands. "This is our chance. The fire is distracting everyone. We have money now, and names of people who might help us. Where did you get money?" "From Catherine's lockbox. And I took pages from her ledger, proof of what she's been doing." Josephine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I need 2 minutes to change." While Josephine dressed, Elizabeth peered out the window. The north field glowed orange against the night sky, with figures rushing about in the distance. Most of the household staff would be helping fight the fire or preparing for potential evacuation. "We'll go through the kitchen garden," Elizabeth decided, "then follow the creek bed until we reach the road. The paper Abigail gave me mentions a place called Widow Morton's, about 3 miles east. If we can get there by dawn." "There's a small postern gate near the smokehouse," Josephine added, now dressed in a dark traveling dress. Samuel doesn't usually lock it. It's too far from the road to worry about. Just as they prepared to leave, footsteps sounded in the hallway, quick and purposeful. The cousins barely had time to step apart before Catherine burst into the room, her face twisted with rage. "What have you done?" she hissed at Elizabeth, closing the door behind her. "Fleming is bleeding out in my study." "He attacked me," Elizabeth said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I defended myself." "Defended yourself? You little fool, do you have any idea what you've done? Fleming has connections throughout Georgia. If he dies, his associates will hunt you to the ends of the earth. And if he lives, he'll expose your operation," Elizabeth countered. "Either way, your business is finished, Madame Willowcrest." Catherine's laugh was hollow. "You think Fleming is my only associate? You think you're the first girl to resist? The authorities know better than to interfere in the affairs of families like mine." She moved further into the room, placing herself between the young women and the door. "This tantrum ends now. You'll both remain here while I decide how to handle this disaster." "We're leaving," Elizabeth stated firmly. "Step aside. You're going nowhere, except perhaps to an early grave if you don't show sense," Catherine snapped. "Sullivan is still downstairs. One call from me and he'll—" Her words cut off abruptly as Josephine, who had been inching toward the washstand, swung a ceramic pitcher with surprising force. It shattered against Catherine's shoulder and head, sending her stumbling sideways into the bedpost. "Run!" Josephine cried, already moving toward the door. Elizabeth hesitated only long enough to confirm that Catherine, though conscious and cursing, was temporarily incapacitated. Then she followed her cousin into the corridor and toward whatever freedom or punishment awaited them. The kitchen garden was deserted, its neat rows of vegetables illuminated by the distant glow of the field fire. Elizabeth and Josephine crept along the stone wall, keeping low and moving as quietly as their shaking limbs would allow. The weight of what they'd done, assaulting Fleming and Catherine, stealing money, pressed down on them with each step. "This way," Josephine whispered, leading them toward a small gate partially hidden by an overgrown arbor of wisteria. Beyond lay a stretch of woodland that separated Willowcrest from the neighboring plantation. The gate creaked as they opened it, the sound seemingly magnified in the tense silence. Once through, they abandoned caution for speed, gathering their skirts and running into the darkness of the trees. The woodland floor was treacherous, full of exposed roots and sudden dips. Elizabeth stumbled twice before they reached the promised creek bed, a shallow watercourse nearly dry in the summer heat. Its rocky bottom provided surer footing, but forced them to move in the open, away from the concealing trees. "If they discover we're gone, this is the first place they'll look," Josephine said between labored breaths. "We need to find the road." Behind them, the orange glow of the fire continued to spread, suggesting the blaze was growing despite efforts to contain it. Shouts carried on the night air, though whether they pertained to the fire or a hunt for the missing women was impossible to tell. After what seemed hours, but was likely less than 30 minutes, they reached a point where the creek passed beneath a small wooden bridge. Above them loomed the dark silhouette of the road. "Which way?" Elizabeth asked, consulting the paper in the faint moonlight. "Widow Morton's is supposed to be east." Josephine pointed to the right. "That direction leads back toward Savannah eventually. The left would take us deeper into plantation country." They climbed the steep bank to reach the road, their dresses collecting burrs and mud that would make them conspicuous to anyone they encountered. The road itself was hard-packed dirt, and they kept to its edges where their footfalls would be muffled. "What will we do if Fleming dies?" Josephine asked as they walked briskly eastward. "We'll be wanted for murder," Elizabeth answered, seeing no point in softening the truth. "But even if he lives, we've stolen money and documents. Catherine won't let that pass. She'll claim we're runaway servants. It's what she's done before." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. "There were others who tried to escape." Josephine nodded. "3 that I know of. One was caught and sold to a man in Louisiana. The others—" She left the sentence unfinished. They walked in silence for a time, each lost in her own thoughts. The road curved and dipped, following the contours of the land. Occasionally the distant lights of a plantation house could be seen through the trees, prompting them to move faster and more cautiously. Around a bend in the road, the sudden sound of approaching horses brought them to a panicked halt. Without speaking, they plunged into the undergrowth beside the road, crouching low among the ferns and brambles. 3 riders passed at a gallop, heading in the direction from which the women had come. In the brief glimpse Elizabeth caught, she recognized Samuel among them. "They're searching for us," she whispered, once the sound of hoofbeats had faded. "Or responding to the fire," Josephine suggested, though without conviction. They continued with renewed urgency, consulting Abigail's directions at each crossroads. After nearly 2 hours of walking, their feet blistered and their nerves frayed, they spotted a small cottage set back from the road. Smoke rose from its chimney despite the summer heat, and a single lantern burned in the window. Could that be it? Elizabeth wondered. "Only one way to find out," Josephine replied, though she made no move toward the cottage. "What if it's a trap? What if Abigail's note was meant to lead us to someone who works with Catherine?" It was a possibility Elizabeth hadn't considered. "We can approach cautiously. If anything seems wrong, we'll run." The path to the cottage door seemed to stretch endlessly. Each step brought new doubts and fears. What awaited them? Help, or merely a different kind of captivity? When they finally reached the door, Elizabeth raised her hand to knock but hesitated. "What do we say?" "Hello! We've possibly killed a man and are running from a woman who sells her nieces to plantation owners." Josephine's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Perhaps just our names would suffice." Before Elizabeth could knock, the door swung open, revealing an elderly black woman with shrewd eyes and a lined face. She surveyed them silently for a long moment before speaking. "Harrington girls, I reckon. Been expecting you to turn up someday." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Get in quick. Catherine's men ride these roads at night." The interior of the cottage was warm from the fire in the hearth, its single room dominated by a sturdy table and several chairs. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a mixture of fragrances that Elizabeth couldn't identify. Along one wall stood a narrow bed, while a curtained alcove suggested additional sleeping quarters. "I'm Martha Morton," the woman said, securing the door with a heavy wooden bar. "Sit before you fall down. You look half dead on your feet." Elizabeth and Josephine sank gratefully into the offered chairs. Now that they had stopped moving, exhaustion hit them like a physical blow. "How did you know who we are?" Elizabeth asked. Martha snorted. "Girl, you're the spitting image of your mother at your age. And you," she nodded toward Josephine, "have your father's chin, God rest his soul. You knew our parents?" Josephine asked, surprise momentarily overshadowing her fatigue. "Knew 'em? I raised Catherine and your mother Elizabeth after their mama died. Was there when both of you were born." Martha moved to the hearth, where a kettle simmered. "Been waiting years for one of you to show up on my doorstep, running from that woman." She poured steaming liquid into 3 mugs and placed them on the table. "Drink. It'll steady your nerves while you tell me what happened." Between them, Elizabeth and Josephine related the events at Willowcrest, Catherine's arrangements, Fleming's assault, their desperate escape. Martha listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "So Catherine's still running her trade," she said when they finished. "Been at it 20 years that I know of. Started with distant cousins, then moved on to nieces when they became available." "You knew." Elizabeth couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. "You knew what she was doing and didn't stop it?" "Girl, who would listen to an old colored woman accusing a respected white plantation mistress? I tried warning people years back. Got myself whipped and nearly sold for my troubles." Martha's tone held no self-pity, only stated fact. "I've helped when I could, given shelter to those who found their way here, sent warnings when possible. Like the note you had Abigail give me, Elizabeth realized. Martha nodded. Abigail's grandmother worked for me before being sold to Willowcrest. We keep connections where we can. Josephine set down her mug. What happens now? They'll be searching for us. If Fleming died— Fleming ain't dead, Martha interrupted. Man's survived worse than a knock on the head. But you're right, Catherine won't let this pass. 2 girls, her ledger pages, and her money. She'll have every slave catcher and sheriff in 3 counties looking for you. Then we need to keep moving, Elizabeth said, though the thought of returning to the dark road filled her with dread. Not tonight, you don't. Roads'll be watched. Martha rose and moved to a loose floorboard near the hearth. Prying it up, she retrieved a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Your mother left this with me years ago, Elizabeth. Said if any of her children ever came seeking help, I was to give it to them. Elizabeth unwrapped the bundle with trembling fingers. Inside lay a man's pocket watch, a small leather pouch heavy with coins, and a sealed letter. The watch bore her father's initials. She knew, Elizabeth whispered. She knew what Catherine was. Your mother escaped Catherine's plans when she was young, Martha confirmed. Ran north and married your father. Catherine never forgave her for slipping away. Elizabeth broke the seal on the letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but her mother's handwriting was instantly recognizable. My dearest child, if you are reading this, then you have encountered the darkness that dwells at Willowcrest. My sister Catherine was broken by our father's cruelty and twisted by his example. What she does to young women he did to her, bartering her as a commodity among his associates. Where I found escape, she found vengeance and profit. The watch and money will help secure passage northward. Martha knows people who can guide you. Trust her completely. Know that I love you and have faith in your strength. The Harrington women have always found their way to freedom, one way or another. Your loving mother, Eleanor Harrington. Elizabeth passed the letter to Josephine, who read it with growing understanding. My mother wrote to yours about Catherine, Josephine said. That's how I ended up at Willowcrest after my parents died. Catherine intercepted the correspondence and presented herself as our benefactor. Martha nodded grimly. Catherine's been cultivating her respectability for decades. Who would believe what happens behind Willowcrest walls? The ledger pages, Elizabeth remembered suddenly, pulling the folded papers from her reticule. These document everything, names, dates, payments. Martha examined the pages, her expression hardening. This might be enough to expose her, if you can get it to someone who'll act on it. Not many will move against families like the Flemings and Sullivans. Then we'll go further north, Elizabeth decided. Philadelphia, perhaps, or Boston. Somewhere Catherine's influence doesn't reach. Won't be easy, Martha warned. 2 young white women traveling alone draw attention, and if Catherine reports you as thieves or worse— We have no choice, Josephine said with unexpected firmness. I won't go to Hargrove's plantation. I won't become what Catherine planned. Martha studied them both before nodding decisively. Rest tonight. Tomorrow I'll send word to people who can help. There's a network, folks who move people north when needed. She didn't elaborate further, but Elizabeth understood she was referring to the rumored underground railroad that helped escaped slaves reach free states. As Martha prepared pallets for them near the fire, Elizabeth felt the weight of the day's events pressing down. They had escaped immediate danger, but their journey had only just begun. Do you think we'll make it? Josephine whispered as they lay side by side in the darkened cottage. We have to, Elizabeth replied, clutching her mother's watch. For ourselves and for all the others Catherine has destroyed. Elizabeth woke to urgent whispers. Dawn light filtered through the cottage's small windows as Martha conversed with a man at the door, tall and weathered, dressed in the rough clothes of a field worker. They've set up checkpoints on every road heading north, the man was saying, claiming they're looking for fugitives who set fire to Willowcrest's cotton store. The fire wasn't an accident, Martha asked. Started in 3 places. Too convenient. The man glanced toward Elizabeth, now sitting up on her pallet. "These the Harrington girls?" Martha nodded. "Isaiah here brings news, child. None of it good." Isaiah stepped fully inside, removing his hat. "Sheriff's got a warrant for your arrest. Murder attempt on Mr. Fleming, theft, arson. Reward posted, $50 each, alive only." "Fleming is alive then," Josephine said, relief evident in her voice. "Barely. Took 40 stitches to close his head. He's at Willowcrest under Catherine's care." Isaiah's expression darkened. "Fleming's son arrived from Savannah this morning with extra men. They're searching every cabin, shed, and hollow tree between here and the city." Elizabeth felt a chill despite the growing heat of the day. "We need to leave immediately." "Not by road," Isaiah cautioned. "They've got dogs." Martha was already moving around the cottage, gathering supplies into a worn carpet bag. "The creek route, Isaiah. Can your brother still help?" Isaiah nodded. "Daniel's waiting with the boat, but they'll need to be quick." River patrol increased after those runaways last month. While Martha and Isaiah discussed routes, Elizabeth and Josephine dressed hastily in clothes Martha provided. Simple cotton dresses and worn boots, far removed from the finery of Willowcrest, but infinitely more practical for their flight. "Your mother's things," Martha said, handing Elizabeth the watch and money pouch. "Keep them hidden. And take these." She added the ledger pages, now sealed in a waterproof oilskin packet. "If you make it north, find a newspaper man named Frederick Collins in Philadelphia. He's published on Southern practices before. He'll know what to do with these." "What about you?" Elizabeth asked. "Won't you be in danger for helping us?" Martha's smile held no humor. "Child, I've been in danger since the day I was born with this skin. Catherine knows better than to move openly against me. Too many of her secrets I could tell. But don't worry about old Martha. Just get yourselves to safety." Isaiah led them out through the cottage's back door and into the woods beyond. The morning air was heavy with humidity, promising another scorching day. They moved quietly through the underbrush, following a barely visible path that seemed to vanish and reappear with each step. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a wider creek than the one they'd followed from Willowcrest. Pulled up onto the muddy bank was a small, flat-bottomed boat. Beside it stood a man who could only be Isaiah's brother. They shared the same tall frame and watchful eyes. "This is as far as we go," Isaiah said. "Daniel will take you downriver to the landing at Harper's Mill. A man named Brooks will meet you there, white fellow with a red beard. He'll have a wagon headed for the coast." "How will he know us?" Josephine asked. "Show him this." Martha pressed a small wooden token into Elizabeth's hand, a simple carving of a bird in flight. "He'll know who sent you." The goodbyes were brief and tense, overshadowed by the knowledge that each minute increased the danger. As Daniel pushed the boat into the sluggish current, Elizabeth watched Martha and Isaiah grow smaller on the shore, two figures who had risked everything to help strangers. The creek widened as they traveled, eventually joining a broader river. Daniel handled the boat with practiced skill, using a long pole to guide them and keep them in the deeper channel where they were less visible from shore. "Stay low," he advised as they approached a bridge, men watching the crossings. Huddled in the bottom of the boat, Elizabeth and Josephine could hear hoofbeats overhead and men's voices. The boat drifted silently beneath the bridge's shadow, emerging on the other side without detection. "How much farther to Harper's Mill?" Elizabeth asked, when it seemed safe to speak again. "Another hour if the current holds," Daniel replied. "But there's a plantation coming up on the left bank, Master Blake's property. He often has men on the river watching for travelers." His meaning was clear. The route they were taking was one used by escaping slaves. Elizabeth and Josephine exchanged glances, newly aware of the additional risk Daniel was taking by transporting white fugitives along this secret path. As they rounded a bend, Daniel suddenly tensed. Ahead, a small dock projected into the river, and on it stood two men with rifles. "River patrol," he murmured, his expression grim. "They'll want to inspect the boat." "What do we do?" Josephine whispered, fear evident in her voice. Daniel considered for a moment, then pointed to several large baskets in the boat's bow. "Get in. They're looking for runners, not white women, but best not to take chances." The baskets were used for fish, still damp and smelling strongly of their previous contents. Elizabeth and Josephine folded themselves into them as best they could, while Daniel covered them with empty sacking. The next moments were excruciating. Elizabeth could hear the patrol calling out to Daniel, their voices growing clearer as the boat approached the dock. She hardly dared breathe, painfully aware that discovery now would mean not only their capture, but severe punishment for Daniel. "Just taking fish to the mill, sirs," she heard Daniel explain, his voice carefully deferential. "Master Isaiah sent me." "Your papers?" one of the patrolmen demanded. There was a rustling sound as Daniel presumably produced whatever documentation allowed him to travel. "Open those baskets," the second man ordered. "Been reports of runaways along this stretch." Elizabeth froze, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. She heard Daniel's footsteps approaching, felt the basket shift as he reached for the covering. What happened next occurred so rapidly that Elizabeth could later recall only fragments. A shout from further upriver, the patrolmen's attention diverted, Daniel's hand pressing down on the sacking in silent warning to remain hidden. Then the sudden lurch as he pushed away from the dock without inspection. "Keep down!" he whispered urgently as they gained the current once more. "Another boat coming!" Through a small gap in the basket's weave, Elizabeth glimpsed a larger vessel moving downriver toward them. A plantation barge laden with cotton bales. On its deck stood several men, including one whose imperious bearing could only belong to the plantation owner. As the barge passed, she caught fragments of conversation. Checked every tributary. Reward doubled if found today. Willow Crest women. Only when the barge had rounded the next bend did Daniel signal it was safe to emerge from hiding. "That was Blake himself," he confirmed. "Looking for you without doubt. The fire at Willow Crest destroyed half their cotton storage. They're claiming you set it deliberately." "But we didn't," Josephine protested. "The fire was already burning when we escaped." Daniel's expression remained neutral. "Truth matters less than what powerful men decide to believe, miss." The remainder of their journey passed in tense silence, each bend in the river bringing new anxiety about what might await them. By the time they reached Harper's Mill, a weathered structure perched on the riverbank with several smaller buildings clustered nearby, the sun was high overhead. Daniel guided the boat to a small secluded landing rather than the main mill dock. "Wait here," he instructed. "I'll find Brooks." As he disappeared among the trees, Elizabeth gripped her cousin's hand. "We're going to make it, Josephine. We have to." Josephine's answering smile was faint but determined. "Together, whatever happens." The wagon creaked and swayed as it traveled along coastal back roads, each jolt a reminder of how far they had come from Willow Crest's polished floors and deadly refinement. 3 days had passed since their escape. 3 days of constant movement, changing vehicles and guides, sleeping in haylofts and abandoned cabins. Brooks, the red-bearded man Martha had promised, had proven taciturn but reliable, transferring them to a produce wagon bound for the coast. From there, they had been passed to a succession of helpers, some black, some white, none offering names or asking questions beyond what was necessary to move them forward. Now they sat in the back of a fisherman's cart, driven by an elderly man who introduced himself only as the captain, his weathered face suggesting decades at sea. Ahead lay their most dangerous crossing yet, the busy port of Charleston, where they hoped to secure passage on a northbound vessel. "Almost there," the captain called over his shoulder as the road widened and the smell of salt water grew stronger. "Remember your story if anyone asks." Their cover was simple. They were sisters traveling to Philadelphia to join their father after their mother's death. The captain would present himself as their uncle, seeing them safely aboard the coastal packet. Elizabeth fingered the small pouch of coins hidden in her bodice. Between her mother's legacy and Catherine's stolen money, they had enough for passage and perhaps a modest start once they reached Philadelphia. The ledger pages remained secure in their oilskin wrapper, tucked into the lining of her traveling bag, evidence of Catherine's crimes that might someday bring justice. "Do you think we'll ever be truly safe?" Josephine asked softly, gazing toward the horizon where masts could now be seen rising above the harbor. "Will she ever stop looking for us?" "Catherine's influence has limits," Elizabeth replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Once we're beyond Georgia and South Carolina, her reach will fade. And we have the ledger, her insurance against us becoming a threat." The captain glanced back at them. "Best not to speak of such things as we enter town. Walls have ears in Charleston." They fell silent as the cart joined increasing traffic on the road. Charleston rose before them, its church spires and fine homes proclaiming its prosperity, a prosperity built like willow crests, on systems Elizabeth now understood far too well. At the harbor, the captain led them directly to a modest vessel called the Northern Light. "Packet leaves on tonight's tide," he explained. "Captain's a friend. He'll see you safely to Philadelphia." The transaction was completed quickly. Passage paid, minimal questions asked, their few belongings stowed in a tiny cabin they would share. As the captain prepared to leave them, Elizabeth impulsively grasped his hand. "Thank you for everything." She hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered since they left Martha's cottage. "Why do you help people like us? You don't know us. You gain nothing." The old man's eyes, faded blue and surrounded by sun-carved wrinkles, studied her face. "Once, long ago, someone helped my wife when she needed it most. I'm just passing that debt forward." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell. "Safe journey, Miss Harrington. May you find what you're looking for." As the Northern Light pulled away from Charleston that evening, Elizabeth and Josephine stood at the rail, watching the city lights recede. Behind them lay Willowcrest, Catherine, and a society that had nearly consumed them. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. "What will we do in Philadelphia?" Josephine asked, her golden hair whipping in the sea breeze. "First, we'll find this newspaper man, Frederick Collins, get the ledger pages to him." Elizabeth's hand moved to the hidden pocket where she kept her mother's letter. "Then we'll build something new together." "I'm afraid," Josephine admitted, "not just of Catherine finding us, of everything. How do we live now? What do we become?" Elizabeth thought of all they had witnessed and endured, Catherine's calculated cruelty, Fleming's predatory entitlement, but also Martha's resilient courage, Isaiah and Daniel's quiet resistance, the captain's understated decency. "We become witnesses," she said finally. "We tell the truth about Willowcrest and places like it. We use our freedom to help others find theirs." She took her cousin's hand. "And we never forget what we escaped, or those still trapped in systems we can't yet dismantle but must someday change." As the coastline disappeared into darkness and the ship pointed northward toward whatever awaited them, Elizabeth felt something unfamiliar unfurling within her, not quite peace, but perhaps its precursor. Hope, tentative but persistent, like a flame that refused to be extinguished despite the winds that threatened it. Behind them, in Georgia, Catherine Willowcrest would be raging, plots forming behind her composed facade. Fleming would be recovering, his influence already working to erase the true nature of his injuries from public record. The ledger at Willowcrest would be missing crucial pages, but new entries would soon replace them. New names, new arrangements, new lives commodified. But for the first time, there was also a breach in that carefully maintained system. Two who were meant to be consumed had instead escaped. Evidence existed that might eventually expose the truth. And with each mile the Northern Light traveled northward, that truth drew closer to light. Elizabeth gazed at the stars emerging above the darkening sea, the same stars that hung over Willowcrest and all who remained there. "We're still connected to them," she murmured, "to everyone we left behind." Josephine followed her gaze upward. "Do you think we'll ever go back?" "Someday," Elizabeth promised, "when we're strong enough to face what waits there, when we can bring something more powerful than Catherine's influence or Fleming's money." "Justice," Josephine said softly. Justice, Elizabeth agreed. And perhaps, for some, freedom. The Northern Light sailed onward through the gathering night, carrying its passengers toward Philadelphia and possibilities yet unnamed. Behind them, Savannah receded into memory, but not into forgetting. Never that. Some stories demanded to be remembered, to be told, to change those who heard them. The Lady of Savannah, who lent her nieces as gifts to landowners, would not be forgotten. George's shame of 1841 would someday be brought to light. Elizabeth Harrington, no longer powerless, no longer alone, watched the horizon and planned for that day.